In the harsh winter of 1856, deep within a secluded corner of southeastern Ohio, 3 newborn boys came into the world under circumstances so astonishing that medical experts still debate their case in hushed tones. Born in the hidden basement of a Quaker meeting house during one of the most perilous nights in Underground Railroad history, these triplets developed abilities that shattered the boundaries of known human psychology and physiology. For more than a century, their descendants have carefully guarded the truth about what those boys could do. Secrets so profound that their revelation would challenge everything we believe about the limits of human perception. What I'm about to reveal has never left the family's private records, has never appeared in any official medical journal, and has never been discussed in academic circles. The evidence was purposefully buried. But tonight, the truth finally emerges from the shadows. Before we delve deeper into this chilling tale that begins within the clandestine corridors of America's most secretive rescue network, I need to ask you something. This channel isn't for everyone. It's only for those with the courage to face mysteries that shake the foundations of what we think is possible. If you're one of the few who can handle stories that blur the line between documented history and the inexplicable, hit that subscribe button right now. And while you're at it, leave a comment telling me which state you're listening from. I want to know where my fellow seekers of the unknown are gathered tonight, because what you're about to hear didn't happen in some distant, mystical land. It happened here in America, in towns that may be far closer to you than you'd ever imagine. This story begins on a bitter February night when 3 lives entered the world in the most unexpected place imaginable, setting off events that would baffle doctors and scientists for generations. The town of Cedar Mills, Ohio, barely qualified as a town in 1856. With a population of about 300, it was little more than a cluster of modest houses, a general store, a blacksmith shop, and a simple brick Quaker meeting house. Unlike their more vocal Christian neighbors, the Society of Friends in Cedar Mills practiced their faith quietly. Their plain dress and solemn manner reflected a deep devotion to simplicity and, above all, to the radical belief that all people were equal in the eyes of God. That conviction had transformed their meeting house into something far more dangerous than a place of worship. It had become Station 14 on the Underground Railroad, a critical refuge for freedom seekers traveling north from Kentucky and Virginia. Elder Samuel Whitmore, with weathered hands from decades working the soil and piercing gray eyes that held countless secrets, had been running this covert operation for nearly 8 years. Beneath the meeting house's plain wooden floor lay a hidden basement, accessible through a trap door beneath the speaker's platform. Dug by hand over months of painstaking work, it stretched almost the entire length of the building. Thick wooden beams reinforced the ceiling, while fresh air flowed through a clever system of hollow fence posts that looked purely decorative. On any given week, between 3 and 15 freedom seekers might take shelter there, some for a night, others for weeks, while they awaited safe passage to the next station. The winter of 1856 was especially dangerous. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had emboldened slave catchers who now prowled Ohio with legal authority to seize escaped people. Bounty hunters like the notorious Garrett brothers had been seen in the area for weeks, offering generous rewards for information on Underground Railroad activities. The air in Cedar Mills was thick with tension. Every unexpected visitor, every late-night knock, every unfamiliar sound carried the threat of exposure and imprisonment. It was during this atmosphere of fear and vigilance that a young woman arrived at the meeting house 3 days earlier. She gave her name only as Ruth, said she was 19 and was heavily pregnant. Samuel had taken one look at her belly and known she wouldn't be traveling farther north anytime soon. What he didn't expect was how soon the birth would come, or how profoundly it would upend their understanding of human nature. Ruth had escaped from a plantation in northern Kentucky. In hushed conversations during her first nights in the basement, she revealed that she had been taught to read, a rare gift for someone in her position, and carried herself with a quiet dignity that impressed even the stoic Quakers. But there was something else about her, something that unsettled people without them knowing exactly why. She possessed an uncanny awareness. She would know someone was approaching the meeting house long before footsteps could be heard. She refused food that appeared fresh but later spoiled. Most unnerving of all, she occasionally looked directly at someone and calmly contradicted what they'd said, not with defiance, but with the quiet assurance of someone who simply knew. That man who brought supplies yesterday, she told Martha, Samuel's wife, on her second evening there. He told you his name was Williams? From Lancaster. Martha nodded, puzzled. His name isn't Williams, Ruth continued softly. And he's never been to Lancaster in his life. I don't know why he lied, but he did. Martha dismissed it as paranoia until 2 days later, when the man's true identity was uncovered. He had indeed given a false name and had been asking suspicious questions about the meeting house. On the night of February 23, 1856, the town was still and frigid. Samuel was leading his evening prayers when a soft knock echoed at the meeting house door, followed by the secret signal. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. But something felt off as he lifted the heavy wooden beam that secured the door. Joshua, a man Samuel had helped before, stumbled inside, his breath clouding the air. "They're coming," he gasped. "The Garrett brothers and at least 6 others. They've got dogs and they know about this place." Someone talked. His eyes flicked toward the basement entrance. "They're 2 hours behind me, maybe less." Samuel felt a chill grip him. In 8 years of operating this station, they had never faced such a direct threat. The meeting house had always seemed secure, protected by both community reputation and meticulous secrecy. But if the Garretts were coming with dogs and inside information, betrayal was certain. The immediate concern was evacuation. 7 people were hiding in the basement, including Ruth, who had been experiencing intermittent labor pains all day. Martha had been keeping watch, hoping the baby would wait another week, but nature had other plans. As if on cue, a low moan rose from beneath the floorboards. Martha's face went pale. "Samuel," she whispered, "Ruth's time has come. Now." The next few hours unfolded like a nightmare carved from cold and fear. While Samuel and 2 men scrambled to evacuate the others through a hidden northern tunnel that emerged nearly a quarter-mile away in a dense grove of oak trees, Martha and her daughter Rebecca rushed into the basement to assist with Ruth's labor. What they encountered in that cramped, dimly lit space defied everything they believed about childbirth. Ruth was deep in labor, but something was profoundly unusual. She showed none of the agony or distress expected during such a difficult birth. Instead, she lay motionless on the rough straw mattress, eyes closed, breathing slow and deliberate. When the contractions came, she neither cried out nor tensed. She simply waited as though attuned to something only she could hear. "How many babies?" Martha asked, pressing her ear to Ruth's swollen belly like generations of midwives before her. Ruth's eyes opened for the first time in nearly an hour. In the flickering candlelight, they seemed almost luminous. 3, she said calmly. 3 boys. They've been waiting for tonight. Martha exchanged a tense glance with her daughter. Triplets were rare even under ideal circumstances. But triplets born in a hidden basement while slave catchers approached with bloodhounds was beyond anything she had ever encountered. More unsettling was Ruth's absolute certainty, not only about the number and gender of the children, but her cryptic statement about them waiting. How could unborn children wait for anything? The distant sound of horses shattered Martha's thoughts. From above came Samuel's urgent voice, "They're here. The tunnel's clear, but we can't risk moving Ruth now." What followed was later recorded in Martha Whitmore's private journal, a document hidden within her family for over a century, until its discovery in 2003 during the renovation of an old farmhouse. According to her account, Ruth's labor intensified the moment the slave catchers arrived, but not in any way Martha had ever witnessed. The first child entered the world in utter silence. No cries, no wailing, only Ruth's soft, steady breathing. Martha caught the infant, a perfectly formed boy, and was startled to find him already breathing normally, his eyes open and alert. Before she could sever the umbilical cord, the second child emerged again in complete silence, alert and breathing as though he had been waiting. The third followed less than a minute later, completing what Martha described as the most unnatural natural birth I have ever seen. Yet the strangest moment came after the births. As Martha wrapped and cleaned the newborns, heavy footsteps and rough voices echoed overhead. The Garrett brothers were inside the meeting house conducting a meticulous search. Boots creaked across the wooden floor just feet above the newborns. At one point, someone stood directly on the trapdoor that concealed the basement. Throughout this tense ordeal, with armed men and tracking dogs directly above, the triplets made no sound. Not a cry, not a whimper, not even the instinctive noises most infants make. They lay completely still in their mother's arms, their identical dark eyes shifting in perfect unison, tracking the unseen movements above. It was as though they understood instinctively that silence meant survival. Ruth remained wordless during the search, cradling her sons and whispering to them in a language Martha could not recognize. Later, she would describe it as soft and fluid like water running over stones. The search lasted nearly 3 hours. The Garretts combed every room, every closet, every conceivable hiding place. Their dogs sniffed around the foundation and scratched at several spots on the floor, but the trapdoor remained undiscovered. At last, frustrated and cursing their informant, they left. Only after the sounds of hooves had faded into the distance did the 3 babies finally cry, for the first time, in perfect unison, their wails intertwining into one haunting, resonant sound that seemed to rise from the walls themselves. Less than an hour later, Ruth died from bleeding Martha couldn't stop, despite all her experience. Her final words, whispered so faintly Martha had to lean close to hear, were, "They'll know things. They'll always know. Take care of them, but remember, they're not like other children." Ruth's death left the Quaker community facing an impossible situation. 3 infants with no father, no documented family, and no legal identity. Born free on Ohio soil but with no papers to prove it. Samuel made a decision that would shape all their lives. The community would raise the boys together. Each family would take turns caring for them, but the responsibility would be shared by all. Following Quaker tradition, they named the boys Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac. From their earliest days, it became clear Ruth's final words had not been the delirium of a dying woman. The triplets were different, subtly at first, but undeniably so. Martha, who took primary care of them during their first year, began keeping meticulous notes. These notes, found alongside her journal, reveal the first signs of their uncanny abilities. At 6 months old, the boys developed a habit that unsettled everyone. They would all simultaneously turn their heads toward the same doorway or window, focusing on empty spaces where no one was visible. Moments later, someone would appear, always someone distressed, angry, or harboring something hidden. They seemed to sense emotional turmoil before any adult could detect it. By their first birthday, this pattern became impossible to dismiss. The triplets could unfailingly detect lies. When spoken to honestly, they responded with ease. When lied to, even over trivial matters, they turned away and refused to interact. Initially, the adults found it amusing, even useful. If someone claimed a chore was done but wasn't, the boys reacted instantly. If a visitor gave a false name, they became uneasy and avoided the person entirely. But their ability went far beyond simple lie detection. As they grew, they appeared to sense deception in all its forms. Spoken, hidden, emotional, or unvoiced. Samuel wrote in private correspondence, "It is as if the boys can see directly into the human heart. This might be a gift were it not such a burden. They are constantly aware of the hidden falsehoods that dwell within us all, and it weighs upon them." Particularly disturbing were their reactions to concealed violence or missing persons. During their second year, a traveling merchant named Thompson stopped at the meeting house. The boys became so distressed in his presence that they could not eat or sleep until he left. Weeks later, word came that he'd been arrested for murdering his partner, whose body had been hidden in his wagon during his visit. By age 3, they had developed what the community called the knowing look, a shared, penetrating gaze they turned on anyone harboring a serious secret. They would whisper to one another in the same strange, flowing language Ruth had used during their birth. Dr. William Harrison, the local physician who observed them closely, was fascinated and disturbed. In a letter to a colleague at the Medical College of Ohio, he wrote that their senses were normal but slightly heightened, yet they consistently knew things they should not have been able to perceive. He concluded that either they possessed an unknown sensory capacity, or he was witnessing a deception. No, 3-year-olds could sustain. Their presence transformed the Underground Railroad operations almost immediately. Word of their abilities spread quietly through the network. Freedom seekers began specifically requesting to pass through cedar mills, knowing the boys could unfailingly expose infiltrators and traitors. The triplets became living sentinels. If they were calm, it meant safety. If they grew agitated, danger was near. Their silent, watchful presence in the basement became a shield no bounty hunter could outwit. If the boys became agitated or refused to enter the basement, it was taken as a sure sign that someone in the group could not be trusted. Samuel Whitmore found himself in the unsettling position of relying on three very young children for the security of one of Ohio's most important underground railroad stations. Yet the boys' accuracy was undeniable. Over a span of 3 years, they identified 7 potential infiltrators, preventing what could have been devastating breaches in the network's secrecy. But their remarkable abilities came with a heavy price that grew more evident as they got older. The boys became increasingly isolated from other children, who found their intense stares and constant whispering deeply unsettling. Adults in the community, though grateful for the protection the triplets provided, could not shake the feeling that they were constantly being judged and evaluated. Even the most honest individuals felt uneasy under the boys' penetrating gaze, aware that their innermost thoughts and emotions seemed somehow visible. Most troubling of all was the boys' growing awareness of their own abilities and the effects these had on others. By the age of 4, they had learned to mask their knowing looks and keep their whispered conferences out of public view. But this self-consciousness only deepened their sense of separation from the rest of the world. As the years passed, the barrier between them and others became increasingly pronounced. The year 1860 brought sweeping changes to Cedar Mills that would test the triplets in ways no one could have foreseen. Abraham Lincoln's election had inflamed tensions across Ohio, and underground railroad operations were becoming ever more dangerous. Federal marshals intensified their raids, and bounty hunters like the Garrett brothers operated with near impunity. During this volatile time, the triplets, now 4 years old, began displaying a new and more disturbing ability. They could not only detect deception and hidden emotions in those physically present, but seemed able to sense the emotional distress of people many miles away. The first documented incident occurred on a bitter January morning. While safely inside the warm meeting house with their caregivers, all 3 boys suddenly became extremely agitated. They began crying simultaneously. Not the usual cries of upset children, but a keening wail that expressed overwhelming terror and despair. Martha Whitmore tried everything she could to soothe them, but nothing worked. For nearly 6 hours, their haunting cries filled the room, stopping only as the sun set. 2 days later, a freedom seeker arrived with devastating news. A group of 11 people, including 3 children, had been captured by slave catchers about 40 miles south of Cedar Mills, at almost the exact time the triplets' crying began. Among the captured was a pregnant woman who gave birth during the attack. Both she and her newborn died from exposure during the forced journey back to Kentucky. Samuel Whitmore was deeply unsettled, but initially dismissed the incident as coincidence, until it happened again 3 weeks later. This time the boys' distress lasted only 2 hours, but was even more intense. The following day, word arrived that a conductor on the Underground Railroad had been shot and killed while assisting a family near Portsmouth, Ohio, at precisely the same time the boys had shown signs of agitation. Dr. Harrison, who had been documenting their development, was called to examine them after a third similar episode. His private notes were profoundly unsettling. During these episodes of apparent long-distance distress sensing, the boys' pulse rates became synchronized, their breathing patterns identical, and their body temperatures dropped several degrees. Most remarkably, their brain activity spiked dramatically. Despite their outward distress, they were clearly undergoing intense mental stimulation. Dr. Harrison concluded that their nervous systems were somehow detecting emotional trauma occurring at great distances, through a mechanism completely unknown to science. The boys' abilities were attuned not to ordinary accidents or natural deaths, but specifically to situations involving deception, betrayal, and mortal danger. Their range seemed to cover most of southern and central Ohio, and possibly northern Kentucky. News of their abilities spread beyond the Underground Railroad network, and families with missing loved ones began traveling to Cedar Mills, hoping the boys could sense whether their relatives were alive and where they might be found. Samuel Whitmore hesitated to exploit their powers, but the boys themselves seemed drawn to these families' desperation. One of the most extraordinary cases involved the Brennan family, whose 16-year-old daughter Mary had vanished while traveling to Columbus. 3 months after her disappearance, her parents arrived in Cedar Mills, having heard rumors of 3 children who could find the lost. Samuel initially refused to involve the boys, but Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac approached the grieving parents on their own. Without prompting, they lined up before Mrs. Brennan and began their characteristic synchronized whispering. After several minutes, Isaac stepped forward, pointed southeast toward the Ohio River and said simply, "She's there. She's scared, but she's alive. The man who took her isn't who he said he was." Acting on this, authorities searched a remote farm near Chillicothe and found Mary Brennan locked in a cellar with 2 other kidnapped young women. The abductor, posing as a traveling preacher, had planned to sell them into prostitution in New Orleans. The rescue of Mary Brennan transformed the community's perception of the triplets. No longer were they just children with an unusual ability to detect lies. They were becoming something altogether different, something that made even their Quaker guardians uneasy. Their powers grew stronger and more precise with each passing month, seemingly without limit. More disturbing still was their emotional detachment. Constant awareness of deception, violence, and suffering took a severe toll. The boys rarely smiled, seldom played, and spent most of their time huddled together, whispering in their private language. When they did speak with adults, their conversations carried a gravity and sorrow far beyond their years. In his final notes before his death in 1862, Dr. Harrison wrote, "I fear we are witnessing the emergence of human beings fundamentally different from the rest of our species. Their abilities are expanding, not stabilizing. I cannot predict what they will be capable of as they mature. More troubling is the psychological burden they bear. These children witness more human suffering and evil than most adults experience in a lifetime, and they do so without the defenses adults develop over time. I fear they will grow into men apart from all others, forever isolated by their terrible knowledge of what lies hidden in the human heart." The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 brought unprecedented chaos to Ohio's Underground Railroad operations, while also creating new opportunities for the triplets to display the full extent of their abilities. As Union and Confederate forces maneuvered through the border regions, the boys began reacting to military events in ways that defied logic. Samuel Whitmore first noticed this during the summer of 1861, when 6-year-old Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac grew increasingly agitated for several days. They would stand at the meeting house windows gazing south toward the Ohio River, their faces etched with expressions of horror far beyond their age. When Samuel asked what troubled them, Isaac, the most vocal, simply replied, "Too many people are going to die. So many people." 3 days later, news arrived of the First Battle of Bull Run, where Union forces had suffered a crushing defeat. The timing was too precise to dismiss as coincidence, especially as similar incidents began occurring more frequently. The boys seemed able to sense major military engagements days or even weeks before word of them reached Cedar Mills, and their emotional responses matched the scale of the casualties with unsettling precision. Even more disturbing was their growing ability to detect specific individuals among the thousands of soldiers moving through the region. In September 1861, a young Union soldier named Thomas Caldwell stopped at the meeting house while traveling home on leave to visit his family in Marietta. The triplets took one look at him and immediately began their synchronized whispering, their faces etched with profound sorrow. Martha Whitmore, now in her 60s but still the boys' primary caregiver, asked them what they sensed about the soldier. Ezra stepped forward and in a voice far too old for his small frame said, "He won't make it home. The man who's supposed to be his friend will shoot him for his money 3 days from now near the river crossing." Caldwell laughed when he heard the prediction, insisting he was traveling alone and had no money worth stealing. But 3 days later, his body was found near a river crossing 20 miles east of Cedar Mills. He had been shot and robbed by a deserter from his own unit, a man named Patterson, who had pretended to be his friend and arranged to accompany him part of the way. The accuracy of this prediction shocked the community, but it was only the beginning. In the following months, the boys began making increasingly specific and chilling predictions about people they met. They could foresee deaths, often pinpointing the day and hour. They could predict betrayals, desertions, and acts of violence with unnerving accuracy. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to know which of the freedom seekers passing through the meeting house would reach Canada safely, and which would be captured or killed. Samuel Whitmore wrestled with the moral weight of this knowledge. Should he warn people based on what the boys saw? Should he try to intervene in the tragedies they predicted? Or was this knowledge too dangerous to act upon? The burden was immense, made heavier by the boys' unsettling emotional detachment. They spoke of death and betrayal with the same casual tone they used to talk about the weather. The turning point came in the spring of 1862. A group of 12 freedom seekers arrived at the meeting house led by James Morrison, a trusted conductor with whom Samuel had worked for years. Morrison had guided hundreds to freedom and was seen as one of their most dependable allies. But the moment the triplets saw him, their reaction was explosive. All three began screaming the instant Morrison entered the meeting house, a sound unlike anything they had ever made before. It wasn't the crying of frightened children, but something primal, animalistic, a visceral warning of danger. They screamed and pointed at Morrison, their faces twisted in pure horror. Morrison was shocked and offended, having never witnessed such behavior from the boys in all his visits. Samuel tried to question them, but they could only repeat, "Death. He brings death. So much death." Despite this, Samuel was reluctant to reject a trusted conductor and 12 desperate fugitives. Morrison insisted he had brought them safely from Kentucky and was ready to continue the journey. The group, men, women, and children ranging from 8 to 60, appeared sincere and showed no signs of deceit. Yet the triplets grew even more agitated. They refused to enter the basement while Morrison and his group were there, and began making precise predictions. "Tomorrow night in the woods by Miller's Creek, he'll call to them, and they'll trust him because they think he's their friend. But the men with guns will be waiting." Samuel faced an impossible decision: trust 3 children whose abilities he barely understood, or risk the lives of 12 people on what could be nothing more than intuition. He settled on a compromise that would haunt him forever. He allowed Morrison and the group to continue, but sent a warning ahead to the next station, and arranged for 2 local men to follow at a distance to provide protection. The next night, the men witnessed exactly what the boys had foreseen. Morrison led the group to a clearing near Miller's Creek. There, instead of guiding them onward, he called into the darkness. Within moments, armed slave catchers emerged from the woods. Panic erupted, but escape was impossible. 7 were killed on the spot, including 2 children. The remaining 5 were captured and dragged back to Kentucky in chains. From their hidden vantage point, the 2 local men watched Morrison accept a substantial payment from the leader of the slave catchers. The betrayal stunned Cedar Mills. A trusted conductor had been working as a double agent for months, feeding information to slave catchers and leading fugitives into traps. 7 people were dead, 5 more were enslaved again, and the community was left reeling. But the most haunting realization was that 3 7-year-old boys had foreseen the massacre, and their warnings had been ignored. The triplets' reaction was unlike anything Samuel had seen before. For the first time in years, they displayed genuine emotion, not anger or grief, but a profound disappointment that reached beyond the immediate tragedy. "People never listen," Isaac said softly, voicing what all 3 felt. "They never want to believe what we can see. They think we're just children. But we've seen more death than anyone in this room. We know what people are capable of when they think no one is watching." His words hung heavy in the room like a verdict. Samuel understood then that something had shifted. The triplets were no longer merely gifted children. They had become something other, beings who could perceive the darkest corners of human nature with perfect clarity. That terrible insight was changing them, setting them apart from the rest of humanity. Just when Samuel thought he had witnessed the full scope of their abilities, events would prove that their powers were still evolving. The question was no longer what they could sense, but what they were becoming, and whether the community could survive the truth of their existence, the revelation that would forever alter the world's understanding. Of the triplets came during the harsh winter of 1863, when the boys were 8 and the Civil War had reached its bloodiest stage. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, one of Ohio's first female physicians and an expert in neurological conditions, had been studying the boys for 6 months under the auspices of the Medical College of Ohio. Inspired by Dr. Harrison's earlier work, she convinced Samuel to allow a thorough medical examination. What she discovered challenged every assumption about human perception. Using the most advanced instruments of 1863, Dr. Hartwell conducted tests that revealed the true nature of the boys' abilities. Her detailed report, immediately classified by military authorities and hidden from public view for over 60 years, documented neurological structures never before observed in human beings. The boys' brains displayed unusually high activity in areas responsible for pattern recognition and emotional processing. Even more astonishing was the discovery that their nervous systems maintained a continuous state of interconnection. When Dr. Hartwell applied a mild electrical current to one boy's arm, the other two exhibited instant physiological reactions, despite being in separate rooms. Their breathing rhythms, heart rates, and brainwave patterns synchronized whenever they focused intensely, creating what she described as a single consciousness distributed across 3 distinct bodies. The most shocking revelation came during her controlled deception experiments. Dr. Hartwell arranged for volunteers to deliver both truthful and false statements while she monitored the boys' physiological responses. The results defied all conventional understanding of human senses. The triplets weren't relying on body language, micro-expressions, or vocal changes to detect lies. They were reacting to measurable shifts in electromagnetic fields generated by human neural activity. Her instruments, crude by modern standards, detected unique electrical patterns in the boys' brains that resonated with the electromagnetic signatures produced by other people's emotions. In simple terms, she wrote in her classified notes, these children exhibit a form of biological electromagnetic sensitivity that enables them to directly perceive the electrical activity of human brains. When someone lies, feels fear, or harbors violent intentions, their neural activity generates specific electromagnetic signatures that the boys can detect with the same precision we use to see colors or hear sounds. This revelation explained their uncanny ability to sense emotional distress across great distances and accurately foresee violent events. They were not supernatural prophets. They were humans whose sensory systems had evolved far beyond typical boundaries. However, her findings raised troubling questions. If their abilities resulted from genetic mutation, what could have caused such a drastic evolutionary change? Examination of tissue samples from their mother, Ruth, preserved in accordance with Quaker customs, provided the answer. Medical analysis revealed that during pregnancy, she had been exposed to massive amounts of industrial chemicals, mercury compounds, and lead-based pigments, used in indigo dye production on southern plantations. While these substances caused devastating neurological damage in Ruth, they triggered unprecedented genetic alterations in her unborn children. The boys represented a new evolutionary development, a mutation that, rather than proving fatal, produced heightened sensory capabilities. They were living evidence that human perception could advance in ways previously unimaginable. Dr. Hartwell's final conclusion was the most chilling. Her genetic analysis indicated that these traits were dominant and heritable. We are witnessing the emergence of a new branch of human evolution, she wrote in her most confidential notes. The boys' children and their descendants would inherit and likely amplify these abilities. Within several generations, their offspring could develop sensory powers that would make ordinary human perception seem primitive. The implications were profound. The triplets were not mere anomalies. They might be the first of a new subspecies. Eventually, their descendants could perceive human thoughts as easily as reading expressions. Yet the immediate issue was what to do with this knowledge amid the Civil War. Both Union and Confederate forces would see the boys as invaluable intelligence assets. Publicizing the research could offer them protection through visibility, but it would also expose them to exploitation. Suppressing it might keep them hidden, but vulnerable to those already aware. The choice was taken out of their hands when federal marshals arrived with orders to bring the triplets to Washington for national security purposes. Someone in the military hierarchy had learned of Hartwell's research and wanted to use the boys to interrogate prisoners and identify spies. But the boys sensed their approach long before they arrived. When Samuel found them, they were already packed to flee. We have to go, Caleb said simply. If we stay, bad things will happen to everyone here. We've seen it, Isaac added. The men coming don't just want to use us. They want to study us, cut us open, learn how we work. Then they'll come for our children. Ezra, the quietest, spoke last. We've seen the future they want. A world where people like us are kept in cages and used as tools. We won't let that happen. As horses approached across the frozen field, Samuel pleaded with them to remain, insisting they'd be safer under government protection. Caleb's reply revealed how far they had matured. Mr. Whitmore, we can sense the intentions of every person within 50 miles. The government isn't coming to protect us. They're coming to own us. We felt their thoughts and know what they plan. The triplets disappeared into the network of caves and hidden passages surrounding Cedar Mills before the marshals arrived. Before departing, they left Samuel with one final revelation. There are others, Isaac said quietly. Not many, but some. Children born during times of great suffering. To mothers exposed to the same poisons that changed us. They're scattered across the country. Most don't even know what they are yet, but we can sense them and they can sense us. Ezra stepped forward, his young face marked with an ancient wisdom. Someday when the world is ready, we'll find the others. We'll teach them what we've discovered, guide them in understanding their abilities, and maybe, if we're careful, we can create something better than what exists now. A world where deception is impossible, where evil intentions can't be hidden, and where no one can pretend to be something they're not. The boy's final words before vanishing into the wilderness carried the weight of both promise and warning. We'll be watching. We'll always be watching. And we'll remember who stood by us and who tried to harm us. That knowledge will be passed down to our children and their children and the generations after them. The world is about to change in ways no one can imagine. And it starts with us. The federal marshals reached the meeting house 3 hours too late. The rooms were empty, with only faint traces of 3 extraordinary children who had disappeared as if they'd never existed. Massive searches were launched, involving military units and tracking dogs, but the boys had melted into the Ohio countryside, leaving behind nothing but questions and whispers. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell's research was swiftly classified and sealed away for more than 6 decades. When her papers finally surfaced in 1924, they sent shockwaves through the scientific world. But by then, the triplets would have been elderly men, and any chance to study them firsthand had long since passed. Samuel Whitmore lived until 1889, carrying the secret of what he had witnessed to his grave. In his personal journals discovered after his death, he wrote, "I have seen the future of humanity, and it fills me with both awe and dread." Those 3 boys represented something unprecedented, something that could either lift humanity to unimaginable heights or destroy us entirely. I can only hope they remembered the love and kindness they were given in our small community. The Underground Railroad station at Cedar Mills continued its mission until the war ended, but after the triplets' departure, its operations grew far more dangerous. Without their ability to detect infiltrators, several conductors were captured or killed. By 1878, the meeting house was abandoned, slowly crumbling into ruin. Yet the triplets' story did not end with their disappearance. In the following decades, scattered reports surfaced across the United States of children with unusual perceptive abilities. A girl in Pennsylvania could foresee accidents days before they happened. Twin boys in Texas had an uncanny gift for finding missing people. A child in California could spot a lie with a single glance. Many dismissed these accounts as tall tales or superstition, but a clear pattern emerged for those who paid attention. These children were always born during periods of intense social unrest or violence, often to mothers who had been exposed to industrial chemicals during pregnancy. Their abilities mirrored the electromagnetic sensitivity Dr. Hartwell had documented in the Cedar Mills triplets. Modern genetic research has confirmed what Dr. Hartwell suspected over a century earlier. Extreme environmental stress combined with exposure to toxic substances can induce rapid genetic mutations that pass to future generations. The Cedar Mills triplets were among the first known examples of stress-induced human evolution, a phenomenon now recognized as more widespread than once believed. At least 47 documented cases of individuals with heightened electromagnetic sensitivity were born between 1850 and 1900, mostly in areas affected by industrial pollution or war. Though most lived quietly without developing their abilities to the triplets level, their genetic legacy spread. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist at Johns Hopkins University, who has spent 2 decades researching electromagnetic sensitivity, estimates that up to 0.1% of today's American population may be descended from these early cases. We are witnessing the emergence of a human variant with sensory abilities never before seen in our species, she explained in a 2019 interview. These people aren't psychics. They have heightened neural sensitivity, allowing them to perceive electromagnetic activity from other human brains. The potential consequences for law enforcement, intelligence, and society as a whole are immense. If Chen is correct, thousands of people might unknowingly possess the ability to detect lies, sense hidden emotions, or find the missing, often dismissing their accuracy as intuition or coincidence. Even more compelling are the implications for humanity's future. If environmental pressure can drive rapid genetic change, what other abilities might emerge as our world continues to evolve? And if the Cedar Mills triplets were right that their abilities would grow stronger with each generation, what might their descendants be capable of today? A surprising clue appeared in 2003 during the renovation of a farmhouse in southeastern Ohio. Workers uncovered a hidden room containing documents preserved for more than a century, including a letter dated 1923. It was written in 3 distinct handwritings but signed under one name, the Children of Cedar Mills. Addressed to future generations who will understand, the letter included detailed genealogical records tracing the triplets' descendants. It revealed that the boys had survived their disappearance, lived long lives, and fathered many children who inherited their extraordinary abilities. Even more astonishing were the precise predictions contained within the letter. Events like the World Wars, the atomic bomb test site, the year of the moon landing, and dozens of other future milestones. The letter ended with a chilling message. We are still here. We are still watching. Our numbers and abilities grow with each generation, as we promised. The time will come when humanity will need what we carry. When that day arrives, we will be ready. Until then, we remain hidden, learning, growing, and preparing for the future. We are the next step in human evolution. A contemporary Ohio address was included, along with a single instruction. When you are ready to know more, come to this place on the anniversary of our birth. We will be waiting. On February 23, 2024, the 168th anniversary of the triplets' birth, more than 50 people gathered at the address, researchers, descendants of Underground Railroad figures, and individuals who claimed similar abilities. What happened at that gathering remains shrouded in secrecy. Attendees have refused to speak, and no official records exist. In the months that followed, several participants began collaborating on investigations involving missing persons, criminal cases, and advanced psychological research. Dr. Chen, who attended the meeting, offered only one cryptic comment. The legacy of the Cedar Mills triplets is far from over. In many ways, it's only beginning. The story of 3 boys born in a hidden basement during one of America's darkest chapters continues to reverberate more than a century and a half later. Whether their lineage represents humanity's next great leap or its most dangerous mutation remains uncertain. But somewhere out there, the descendants of Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac are still watching, still learning, and still preparing for what comes next. If their ancestors' ability to foresee the future remains true, the next stage of human evolution may be closer than anyone suspects. This mystery challenges our assumptions about the limits of human perception and raises profound questions about how extraordinary circumstances can shape extraordinary individuals. What do you think? Could human evolution take such sudden leaps under pressure? Have you ever experienced a moment of intuition so precise it felt impossible? Share your thoughts about the triplets and whether their descendants might still walk among us today. If you enjoyed this story and want more mysteries that blur the lines between science and the impossible, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves uncovering hidden truths. Join us in the next video as we explore another dark and forgotten secret from America's past.